The moment I saw the crumpled ticket on the floor of his car, my heart skipped a beat. It was a ticket to the Grand Metropolitan Theater, a venue we'd often driven past, but never visited together. The date printed on it was tonight. My mind raced. He had told me he was going to a business dinner, a corporate networking event, something tedious and mundane that I didn't question because I trusted him. Or at least I thought I did. But a single ticket to the theater for a show that evening didn't align with the narrative. The ticket wasn't even hidden, not tucked away in a glove compartment or slipped between the seats. It was just lying there, out in the open, as if daring me to confront it. Was this some kind of mistake? A receipt from a client, perhaps? A gift he forgot to mention? I drove home in silence. The music in the car turned down low, as if the stillness could help me think more clearly. By the time I parked in our driveway, I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't call him. I wouldn't text. Instead, I'd go to the theater myself. The ticket was for 2 seats. Whoever he was going with, they'd be there. And I needed to see it with my own eyes. That evening, I dressed with care, simple yet elegant. A navy dress I hadn't worn in years, paired with understated jewelry. I wanted to look good but not like I was trying too hard. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with nausea. My hands trembled slightly as I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the theater. The Grand Metropolitan Theater was as grand as its name suggested. Gilded chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light on the plush red carpets and ornate gold details. The air buzzed with excitement, patrons chattering as they filed into the auditorium. I clutched my ticket tightly, my eyes scanning the crowd. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. His face, her face, anything out of place. My stomach churned as I imagined the worst. I took my seat a few rows from the back, positioned where I could see most of the audience without drawing too much attention to myself. My pulse quickened as I scanned the rows ahead. And then I saw him. There he was, sitting 3 rows ahead, unmistakable in his navy suit. He looked relaxed, even happy, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the stage lights. But it was the woman beside him who made my chest tighten. She was stunning, blonde, elegant, and laughing softly at something he said. Her hand rested on the armrest, and his hand was on hers, fingers lightly intertwined. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run down the aisle, and demand an explanation. But I did none of those things. Instead, I sat frozen, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to breathe. The lights dimmed, and the performance began. The play itself was a blur, a romantic drama about longing and betrayal that cut far too close to home. I barely registered the actor's lines, my focus shifting constantly to the couple in front of me. The way he leaned in to whisper something to her during a quiet moment. The way she rested her head briefly on his shoulder. Each gesture felt like a knife to my chest. Yet I couldn't look away. When the final curtain fell, the audience erupted into applause. He stood, clapping enthusiastically, then helped her with her coat as they prepared to leave. My moment had come. I followed them into the lobby, keeping a careful distance. My hands felt clammy, and my heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone around me could hear it. As they paused near the exit, I walked up to them. My heels clicked loudly against the marble floor, the sound drawing their attention. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. His eyes widened in shock, his expression a mix of guilt and panic. She looked confused, glancing between us as if trying to piece together what was happening. "How was the show?" I asked, my lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. "I thought it was wonderful. Especially the ending." For a moment there was silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that fills the air before something shatters. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. The woman beside him still looked puzzled, though a flicker of realization was beginning to dawn in her eyes. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to. Turning on my heel, I walked away, my head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. As I stepped out into the cold night, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. I had seen enough, said enough. The betrayal burned, but in that moment, I felt a quiet sense of power. He had been caught, and no matter what excuses or lies he might try to spin later, He would never erase the truth of what had just unfolded. And I would never let him forget it. As I walked down the steps of the theater into the chilly night air, the adrenaline that had been sustaining me began to fade. My breath formed clouds in the cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, as if that could shield me from the whirlwind of emotions coursing through my body. I didn't know where to go. Home felt like an unbearable option, but I couldn't just stand on the sidewalk outside the theater, vulnerable and exposed. People moved around me in clusters, laughing and chatting about the performance, their faces bright with joy. It was surreal, like I was in a bubble, completely separate from their world. I pulled out my phone, intending to call a cab, but my fingers hovered over the screen. Who could I call? A friend? My sister? Even thinking about sharing what I'd just seen felt like opening a wound that I wasn't ready to examine. My hand dropped to my side, and I began walking aimlessly, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The soft hum of traffic and the occasional chatter of pedestrians filled the silence around me. But my mind was elsewhere. I replayed the scene over and over. The warmth in his eyes as he looked at her, the gentle way he touched her hand, the laughter they shared. It was intimate in a way that felt deeper than the physical. It was the kind of connection I thought we had. Or maybe once had. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. I couldn't fall apart here, not on this crowded street. As I turned a corner, I spotted a small cafe still open, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The place was quiet, almost empty, except for a barista cleaning the counter, and an older man sitting in the corner reading a newspaper. I ordered a tea, something to keep my hands busy, and chose a table by the window. The heat of the mug against my palms was soothing, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. I stared out at the street, watching people hurry by, bundled in coats and scarves, their lives continuing as mine had seemingly come to a halt. How long had this been going on? The question nagged at me. Was this their first date, or had there been others? Did he love her? The thought made me feel physically ill. Was she someone from his work? A stranger? A fling? Or something worse? Someone he'd been emotionally involved with for months, years even? The signs I realized had been there. Late nights at the office that didn't always add up. The sudden interest in new colognes. The way he'd been distracted during our conversations lately. But I'd ignored them, chalking it up to stress or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 5. I thought we were solid. Sure, things hadn't been perfect. There had been arguments, moments of distance, but I'd always believed we'd get through them. I sipped my tea, the warmth sliding down my throat, grounding me in the moment. He hadn't seen this coming. That much was clear from his face when I approached them. His eyes had widened in shock, and for the first time in years, I saw him speechless. I had controlled the moment, and for that, I felt a flicker of pride. But now what? I could confront him at home, demand an explanation, but what would it change? The image of his hand on hers was burned into my memory. No excuse, no apology would erase it. The barista was closing up, and I realized I'd been sitting in the cafe far longer than I thought. I left a tip on the counter and stepped back into the night, the cold biting at my face. My feet carried me toward home automatically, though I moved slowly, reluctant to face what awaited me. As I approached our front door, the lights inside were on. He was home. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk away, and never look back. But another part, the stronger part, knew I needed to go in. I needed answers. I needed closure, whatever form that might take. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth of the house was stifling after the cold, and the familiar scent of our space hit me like a punch. There he was, sitting on the couch, still in his suit, his tie loosened, and a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed him. Guilt. "You're home late," he said, his voice carefully measured, as if trying to gauge my mood. I closed the door behind me and slipped off my coat, hanging it deliberately on the hook by the door. My movements were calm, controlled, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I went to the theater," I said evenly, watching his reaction. His hand tightened around the glass, the faintest tremor in his fingers. The theater? Yes, I said, stepping further into the room. You know, the Grand Metropolitan. The show tonight was incredible. Very revealing. His face paled. He set the glass down on the coffee table and stood, his hands slipping into his pockets, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. I can explain, he started, his voice faltering. Can you? I asked, tilting my head. Because from where I was sitting it seemed pretty clear. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not what you think, he said finally, though the words sounded hollow even to him. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Really? Because I think it's exactly what it looked like. You, her, holding hands, whispering, laughing. Should I go on? He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something break in his expression. He sat back down, his head in his hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he murmured. No, I said, my voice steady. It wasn't. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for him to continue, to offer something, an explanation, a confession, anything. But he stayed silent, and in that silence I found my answer. Whatever love we'd shared, whatever bond we'd built, it was broken now. Irrevocably. I turned and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring decisions about our marriage, our home, our future. But tonight I needed to be alone. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was sharp, yes, but it was also cleansing. He'd made his choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The morning light seeped through the curtains, soft and golden, brushing against the walls of our bedroom. I hadn't slept much, but I wasn't groggy. The night had been spent cycling through waves of anger, sorrow, and determination. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as though I were observing my own life from the outside, studying it like a puzzle to be solved. Today I told myself I would confront him properly. Last night's brief exchange had left too much unsaid, too many loose ends. I got up quietly, slipping into a comfortable sweater and jeans. The house was silent. He must still be asleep. I padded softly into the kitchen and started the coffee maker, the familiar hum and aroma grounding me as I prepared for what was to come. As the coffee brewed, I looked out the window. The street outside was coming to life. Neighbors leaving for work, children waiting for the school bus, the world spinning as if my own hadn't just been torn apart. The sound of footsteps behind me broke my reverie. I didn't turn around, keeping my eyes on the swirling steam rising from my mug. Good morning, he said, his voice tentative, testing the waters. Morning, I replied evenly, taking a sip of coffee. My tone didn't invite further conversation, but I could feel his presence lingering behind me, unsure whether to stay or retreat. Finally, I turned to face him. He looked disheveled, his usually neat hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept much either. We need to talk, I said, setting my mug down on the counter. He nodded, his jaw tightening as he pulled out a chair at the dining table. I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, charged with all the things I wanted to say but didn't know how to start. Finally, I broke the silence. How long? I asked, my voice steady, though my chest felt like it might collapse under the weight of the question. He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. It's not. It's complicated. Complicated. I repeated, my voice rising slightly. It didn't look complicated last night. It looked very simple. You and her enjoying a night out together. Laughing. Holding hands. Tell me, what's complicated about that? He flinched at the sharpness in my tone but didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. It's been a few months. The words hit me like a slap. I prepared myself for this, or so I thought, but hearing it out loud was another thing entirely. Few months. While I'd been going about my days, believing in the life we'd built together, he'd been sharing parts of himself with someone else. Who is she? I asked, my voice colder now. Someone from work? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes. She's in marketing. We started working on a project together. And it just happened. It just happened? I repeated, disbelief lacing my words. Like tripping over a crack in the sidewalk? Or spilling coffee on your shirt? Is that how you're going to explain it? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his posture. I'm not trying to excuse it. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen, I said bitterly. But it didn't stop you from buying tickets to the theater, from holding her hand, from lying to me about where you were going. His eyes met mine then, and for a moment, I saw something raw and vulnerable in his gaze. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that filled the room. You didn't want to hurt me? That's rich. Because here I am, sitting across from my husband, hearing him admit to months of betrayal. And I can tell you, I'm hurt. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. Finally I stood, unable to sit still any longer. I began pacing the room, my mind racing. So what now? I asked, throwing the question into the air. What happens next? Do you keep seeing her? Do you leave? Do I leave? Do we pretend this never happened? I don't know, he said, his voice small. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. That's the problem. I shot back, stopping to glare at him. You don't know. You didn't know when you started this affair. And you don't know now. But I know one thing. I deserve better than this. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt a surge of clarity, a sense of power. I did deserve better. I deserved honesty, respect, love. All the things that had been missing for months, without me even realizing it. I need space, I said, finally, my voice firm. I can't make any decisions right now, and frankly, I don't trust myself to even look at you without feeling angry or betrayed. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. You can stay here, or go wherever you want. I don't care. But I need time. He looked like he wanted to argue, to plead his case. But he must have seen the resolve in my expression, because he simply nodded. Okay, he said quietly. I'll respect that. I didn't say anything else. Instead, I turned and went to the bedroom, grabbing a suitcase and beginning to pack. Each item I folded into the bag felt like another layer of my old life being peeled away. This wasn't how I'd envisioned things. I hadn't planned for this. But as I zipped up the suitcase and took one last look around the room, I realized something. I was stronger than I thought. And whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. As I stood in the bedroom, suitcase by my side, a strange calm washed over me. The storm of emotions that had threatened to consume me all night seemed to recede, leaving behind a hollow but manageable ache. I took one last look around the room, at the shared memories embedded in every corner. The photos on the nightstand, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. It was a space I'd once considered my sanctuary, but now it felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. I pulled the suitcase into the hallway, the soft scrape of the wheels on the wooden floor the only sound in the quiet house. He was still in the kitchen when I emerged, sitting at the table, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. He didn't look up when I passed, and I didn't offer a goodbye. What was there to say? The words felt unnecessary, even pointless. The cold morning air hit me as I stepped outside, crisp and biting against my skin. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting it ground me, before heading toward my car. The suitcase fit neatly into the trunk, and as I slid into the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring straight ahead. My sister's house wasn't far, just a short drive across town, but it felt like I was embarking on a journey to another world. A place where I could find some semblance of clarity, and maybe even begin to piece myself back together. The roads were quiet, the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of my tires against the asphalt the only company for my thoughts. I replayed the conversation in my mind, dissecting his every word, his every gesture, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue to what had gone wrong between us. Was it me? Had I been too complacent, too trusting? Or was this simply who he was? A man who couldn't resist the allure of something new, something exciting? By the time I pulled into my sister's driveway, my chest felt tight with the weight of it all. Her house was a modest, cozy place with a neatly tended garden and a cheerful wreath on the front door. It was the kind of home that exuded warmth and stability, the kind of place I needed right now. I knocked lightly, and within seconds, the door swung open to reveal my sister, her face etched with concern. "Claire," she said, her eyes scanning my face before drifting down to the suitcase by my side. "What's going on?" I tried to smile, but it felt forced, brittle. "Can I stay here for a while?" I asked, my voice quieter than I'd intended. "Of course," she said immediately, stepping aside to let me in. She took the suitcase from me and set it by the couch before turning back with a look that said she was ready to listen whenever I was ready to talk. I sank into the familiar cushions of her living room sofa, the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting in from the kitchen. It was comforting in a way, but also a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside me. Claire sat down beside me, her hands resting lightly on her knees, waiting patiently. "It's Jack," I began, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "He's been seeing someone else." Her expression shifted from concern to shock, then to anger. "What? Are you serious?" I nodded, my throat tightening as I recounted everything. The ticket, the theater, the confrontation, his half-hearted attempts to explain. She listened without interrupting, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "That bastard," she muttered when I finished. "I can't believe he would do this to you." "Neither can I admitted, my voice trembling. "I thought we were happy, or at least I thought we were solid. I didn't see this coming." She reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, Claire. This is on him. He made the choice to betray your trust. Don't you dare blame yourself." I nodded, though her words didn't fully sink in. It was hard not to question everything. Every moment, every decision, every glance I might have overlooked. But sitting here in the warmth of her home, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. I had her, and that was a start. The next few days passed in a blur. Claire insisted I take her guest room, despite my protests that the couch was fine. She cooked meals, distracted me with old movies and board games, and listened patiently whenever I needed to talk. But even with her support, the weight of the betrayal lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I avoided Jack's calls, letting them go to voicemail, each one a reminder of the life I'd left behind. On the third day, I finally listened to one of his messages. His voice was hoarse, as though he hadn't slept. "Claire, please. I need to talk to you. I know I messed up, but I can't fix this if you won't talk to me. Please just call me back." I deleted the message without responding. What was there to say? I didn't want apologies or excuses. I wanted to move forward, to figure out who I was without him, to rebuild the pieces of myself he'd shattered. It wasn't easy. Nights were the hardest when the house was quiet, and the memories came rushing back. I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying moments from our relationship. The good, the bad, the times I thought we were unshakable. But with each passing day, the pain became slightly less sharp, the weight slightly less suffocating. I began to see glimpses of a future beyond him, a life where I could be whole again. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I started to find myself. I took long walks, rediscovered old hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Jack sent a few more messages, each one more desperate than the last, but eventually they stopped. I didn't miss them. I didn't miss him. One evening, as I sat on Claire's porch watching the sunset, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the weight of a relationship that had slowly eroded without me even noticing. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time that felt like enough. Load failed. The days turned into a rhythm, a steady cadence that began to feel like a life of its own. I stayed at Claire's house longer than I initially intended. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a brief escape while I sorted through my feelings. But as weeks passed, I realized I wasn't just avoiding Jack. I was discovering something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The mornings were quiet, filled with the sound of birds outside the window, and the occasional clatter of Claire making breakfast in the kitchen. The evenings were cozy, spent with a book in hand or a quiet conversation over tea. It was nothing grand, nothing extraordinary, but it was healing. Jack's absence grew less noticeable with each passing day. The calls and texts had stopped altogether, though I occasionally caught myself checking my phone, half expecting to see his name light up the screen. It wasn't longing. I didn't miss him, not really. It was more a habit, a muscle memory formed over years of being connected to someone. But habits can be broken, and with time even that reflex began to fade. One afternoon, while cleaning out the spare room I'd claimed as my own, I found an old box of photos I'd brought with me in the rush to leave. It was tucked beneath a stack of books, its contents untouched since I'd packed it. I hesitated for a moment before lifting the lid. Inside were snapshots of a life that now felt distant: vacations, birthdays, quiet evenings at home captured in grainy Polaroids and digital prints. There was a photo of Jack and me on our honeymoon, arms wrapped around each other, the ocean stretching endlessly behind us. Another of us at a New Year's party, laughing with confetti in our hair. I sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through the pictures, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and detachment. These were moments I had cherished, memories I had held onto as proof of our love. But now they felt like artifacts from someone else's life, relics of a story that had ended. I closed the box and slid it back under the bed, deciding it could wait for another time. There was no rush to unpack the past. Instead, I focused on the present. Claire's encouragement and unwavering support gave me the strength to take small but significant steps forward. I updated my resume and began applying for jobs, something I hadn't done in years. Jack and I had been comfortable financially, and I'd left my job early in our marriage to focus on supporting his career and managing our household. But now I craved independence. I wanted something that was mine, something that couldn't be taken away or tarnished by betrayal. It didn't take long to find a position at a local nonprofit. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and I quickly found myself immersed in the daily tasks of grant writing and community outreach. My coworkers were warm and welcoming, and the office buzzed with a sense of purpose that reminded me what it felt like to be part of something meaningful. For the first time in months, I felt truly alive, like I was rebuilding my life from the ground up. The transformation wasn't just internal. Claire noticed it too. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, she turned to me with a soft smile. "You're different," she said. "In a good way. It's like you've come back to yourself." I thought about her words long after she'd gone inside. She was right. I was different. Stronger, more resilient. I still carried the scars of what had happened, but they no longer defined me. They were just part of my story, a chapter in a book that was still being written. Months later, I found myself back at the Grand Metropolitan Theater, this time with a group of friends from work. It was a casual outing, a celebration of a successful fundraiser we'd organized. The familiar gilded chandeliers and plush red carpets greeted me as we stepped into the lobby, and for a moment, I felt a pang of unease. This place held memories I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. But as the night unfolded, the laughter and camaraderie of my friends filled the space, drowning out the ghosts of the past. During intermission, I wandered to the balcony overlooking the main foyer. The crowd below buzzed with energy, people chatting and sipping drinks. As I leaned against the railing, I spotted a familiar figure in the crowd: Jack. He was standing near the entrance, looking around as if searching for someone. My heart skipped, but it wasn't fear or sadness or longing that gripped me. It was something closer to curiosity. He hadn't seen me, and I debated whether to approach him. Part of me wanted to slip away unnoticed, to leave him as a distant figure in the rearview mirror of my life. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over these past months, wanted closure. I wanted to see him, to face him, to remind myself of how far I'd come. I made my way down the stairs, weaving through the crowd until I was a few feet away from him. He turned just as I approached, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw me. "Claire," he said, his voice uncertain. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to see you either," I replied, my tone neutral but firm. "Are you here alone?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I've been trying to get out more, do things on my own." I studied him for a moment. He looked older, more tired, as though the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. There was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a shadow of regret. "I'm glad you're doing that," I said. "It's important to figure out who you are when you're alone." He blinked, as if taken aback by my response. "You seem different," he said. "Stronger." "I am," I said simply. There was no need to elaborate. He didn't need to know the details of my journey, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the mornings I'd woken determined to start anew. That story was mine and mine alone. We stood there for a moment, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Finally he spoke.
Claire, I'm sorry.
For everything. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it. Every day. I believe you, I said, surprising even myself. But your regret doesn't change what happened. It doesn't fix the trust you broke. He nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. I know. I wish I could go back. We can't go back, I said gently. But we can move forward. And that's what I'm doing. With that, I turned and walked away, my heart lighter than it had been in months. As I rejoined my friends, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was embracing the future one step at a time. The days after seeing Jack at the theater felt like the final pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. It wasn't just closure. It was a release. A moment when I realized that the weight of what had happened no longer defined me. His apology, while sincere, wasn't the thing that healed me. It was the simple truth that I'd looked him in the eye and walked away, choosing myself, my dignity, and the future I was building over the remnants of a life we could no longer share. Work at the nonprofit continued to thrive, filling my days with purpose and structure. The people I met through my job, whether they were coworkers, donors, or the beneficiaries of our efforts, reminded me of the resilience of the human spirit. Their stories were often full of heartbreak and struggle, but also of triumph and renewal. I saw pieces of myself in them, and it became a quiet kind of therapy to help others while rebuilding my own life. My sister Claire was a constant presence, her unwavering support a steady anchor. One evening after a long day at work, she surprised me with a small gift, a leather-bound journal. "You've been through so much," she said, handing it to me with a gentle smile. "Maybe writing it down will help you make sense of it all." I ran my fingers over the smooth cover, feeling the weight of her words. That night, I opened the journal and began to write. At first, it was halting and awkward, a jumble of thoughts and emotions spilling onto the page. But as the days turned into weeks, the process became cathartic. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, the moments of doubt and despair. But I also wrote about the strength I'd found, the small victories, the glimmers of joy that had begun to creep back into my life. The journal became a confidant, a safe space where I could pour out everything without fear of judgment. As time passed, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath the routines of marriage and the expectations I'd placed on myself. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. The sensation of clay beneath my fingers, the focus required to shape it into something beautiful, was both calming and exhilarating. I wasn't very good at first, my early attempts were lopsided and uneven, but I didn't care. It was mine and it felt good to create something with my own hands. One Saturday afternoon, as I was leaving the pottery studio, I bumped into an old friend, Emma. We'd lost touch over the years, our lives diverging as careers, relationships, and distance pulled us in different directions. Seeing her again was like stepping back into a warm memory. Her laughter was just as infectious as I remembered, and we quickly fell into easy conversation. "Claire, it's been forever," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You look amazing. What's been going on with you?" The question caught me off guard. How could I sum up everything that had happened, the heartbreak, the healing, the rediscovery, in a single answer? But as I looked at her expectant face, I realized I didn't need to recount every detail. "A lot," I said simply, smiling. "But I'm in a good place now." We exchanged numbers and made plans to catch up over coffee. That coffee turned into a long lunch, and soon Emma became a regular part of my life again. She introduced me to her circle of friends, a vibrant, eclectic group of people who welcomed me with open arms. Through them I discovered new hobbies, new places, and a new appreciation for the city I'd lived in for years but had never truly explored. One evening, Emma invited me to a rooftop party at a downtown art gallery. The space was stunning, with twinkling fairy lights strung above and a panoramic view of the city skyline. I wandered through the crowd, admiring the artwork and sipping a glass of wine. As I stood by the railing watching the city lights flicker like stars, a voice broke through my thoughts. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" I turned to see a man standing beside me, his hands resting casually on the railing. He was tall, with dark hair and a warm smile that felt genuine. It is, I replied, nodding. Sometimes I forget how much this city has to offer. Same here, he said. I've lived here for years, but it still surprises me. We fell into conversation easily, talking about everything from art to travel to our favorite hidden spots in the city. His name was Andrew, and there was something refreshing about him. An openness, a kindness that put me at ease. As the evening wore on, I found myself laughing more than I had in months, the heaviness that had once clung to me melting away. By the time the party began to wind down, Andrew asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a moment, the familiar fear of vulnerability creeping in. But then I thought about how far I'd come, the strength I'd found in starting over. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Our first coffee date turned into a second, and then a third. Andrew wasn't like Jack. He was patient, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. Not just the surface version, but the real me, with all my complexities and scars. I took things slowly, careful not to rush into anything, but with each passing day, I felt more at ease in his presence. He didn't try to fix me, or fill the empty spaces in my life. Instead, he complemented them, encouraging me to continue building the life I wanted. Months later, as we walked hand in hand through the city park on a crisp autumn evening, I realized something. I was happy. Not the fleeting surface-level happiness that comes from distractions or temporary highs, but a deep, steady contentment. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and while the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined me. Looking up at the orange and gold leaves swaying gently in the breeze, I squeezed Andrew's hand and smiled. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. As the seasons changed, so did I. The life I was building wasn't just a new chapter. It felt like an entirely different book, one where I was both the author and the protagonist. Every decision I made, every step I took, reinforced the idea that I could shape my future however I wanted. I no longer felt defined by what had happened to me, but rather by how I had chosen to rise from it. Andrew became a steady presence in my life, though I was careful to maintain the independence I'd fought so hard to reclaim. He understood that I needed time to trust fully again, and he never pushed for more than I was ready to give. Instead, he offered quiet support, his actions speaking louder than any words could. Whether it was surprising me with my favorite tea on a busy day, or listening patiently as I shared my fears and hopes, he made me feel seen and valued in a way I hadn't felt in years. One day, as we walked through the bustling farmers' market downtown, Andrew pointed out a booth selling hand-painted pottery. The colorful bowls and mugs caught the sunlight, their intricate designs glowing like stained glass. "Didn't you say you've been taking pottery classes?" he asked, picking up a small vase with delicate blue swirls. "I did," I said, smiling. "I'm not nearly this good, though. Most of my pieces end up looking like wobbly ashtrays." He chuckled, setting the vase down. "I doubt that. You should show me sometime." His words struck a chord, not because of their simplicity, but because of what they represented. For so long, I'd felt like I had to hide pieces of myself, even in my previous relationship. But with Andrew, I didn't feel that way. There was no pressure to perform, or to mold myself into someone else's expectations. I could simply be me, flaws, wobbly pottery and all. As our relationship deepened, I found myself opening up more, not just to him but to the world around me. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found the time for. The women in the group were diverse in age and background, their conversations lively and thought-provoking. It was refreshing to connect with people outside the context of my work or my past, to forge new friendships based on shared passions and curiosity. At work, I took on more responsibilities, eventually leading a major project that resulted in a significant grant for the nonprofit. The success felt personal, a testament to the strength I'd discovered within myself. My coworkers celebrated with me, their support a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. The sense of community I'd found there became another cornerstone of my new life. Even my relationship with Claire evolved. While she had always been my rock, our dynamic shifted as I grew more confident in my ability to stand on my own. We talked less about Jack in the past and more about the future. Her plans to start a small business, my aspirations to travel. It was as if we were rediscovering each other, not just as siblings, but as two women carving out their own paths. One weekend, while sorting through some boxes I'd brought to Claire's house months ago, I stumbled upon the journal she'd given me. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by how far I'd come. The early entries were raw and jagged, filled with pain and uncertainty. But as I read on, the tone shifted. Hope began to seep in, tentative at first, but growing stronger with each page. By the time I reached the final entry, written just a few weeks ago, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for how much I'd healed, but for the person I was becoming. Inspired, I decided to start a new journal. This one wouldn't be about loss or recovery, but about the possibilities ahead. I wrote about the places I wanted to visit, the skills I wanted to learn, the dreams I hadn't yet dared to pursue. It felt like planting seeds in fertile soil, each word a promise to myself that the future was mine to create. As the months turned into a year, I found myself looking back on the day I discovered that theater ticket with a strange sense of detachment. What had once been the most painful moment of my life now felt like a distant memory, a turning point that had propelled me toward something better. I didn't regret confronting Jack or leaving him, nor did I hold on to anger toward him. In fact, I rarely thought of him at all. He had been a chapter in my story, but the book wasn't about him. It was about me. On the anniversary of the day I left, I decided to mark the occasion not with sorrow but with celebration. I invited Claire, Emma, and a few close friends over for dinner, cooking a meal that filled the house with the warm, inviting aromas of rosemary and garlic. Laughter echoed through the rooms as we ate and shared stories, the kind of easy camaraderie that made me feel deeply grateful for the people in my life. Later that evening, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Andrew came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You've been smiling all night," he said, his voice soft. "What's on your mind?" I turned to face him, a contented smile still lingering on my lips. "Just thinking about how far I've come. About how lucky I am." He tilted his head, studying me with those kind, steady eyes. "You've worked hard for this, Claire. It's not luck, it's you." His words stayed with me long after the party ended, long after the house grew quiet and I found myself alone with my thoughts. He was right. I had worked for this. I had faced the darkness, wrestled with it, and emerged stronger. The life I was living now wasn't a gift, it was a triumph. That night, as I lay in bed, I allowed myself a moment of pride. The scars were still there, faint reminders of what I'd endured, but they no longer hurt. They were just part of the tapestry, woven into a story that was still unfolding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were quiet, but in the best way. There was a rhythm to my life now, one that felt steady and purposeful. Mornings were my favorite. I would wake early, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, and sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the world wake up. Birds chirped in the trees, the occasional hum of a car passing by broke the silence, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly still. These mornings were my sanctuary, a time to reflect and breathe before the day began. At work, things were busier than ever. The nonprofit had taken on a new initiative, and I found myself leading a team to organize a community event. It was a daunting task, securing sponsors, coordinating volunteers, managing logistics, but I thrived under the challenge. Each day brought new hurdles, but with them came the satisfaction of progress. I saw the impact we were making firsthand, from the gratitude of the families we helped to the excitement of the volunteers who joined our cause. It was fulfilling in a way I hadn't anticipated, and it gave me a sense of purpose that felt deeply personal. Outside of work, my social circle continued to grow. Emma introduced me to her friends, and soon I found myself surrounded by a lively, eclectic group of people. We spent weekends exploring the city, visiting art galleries, trying new restaurants, hiking the trails just outside town. Their energy was infectious, their laughter a reminder that life was meant to be enjoyed. For the first time in years, I felt part of something bigger than myself, a community that embraced me for who I was, not who I used to be. Andrew was still a part of my life, though we had found a balance that felt natural and unforced. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance, It was something quieter, steadier, built on mutual respect and understanding. He never pressured me for more than I was ready to give, and I appreciated his patience. We spent time together in simple ways. Cooking dinner, going for long walks, watching old movies on the couch. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was real, and that was enough. One evening, as we sat on a blanket in the park watching the sun dip below the horizon, Andrew turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "you've changed a lot since we first met." "Have I?" I asked, curious. He nodded, his gaze steady. "When I met you, there was a heaviness about you, like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. But now, you seem lighter, happier." I considered his words, letting them sink in. He was right. The person I was now felt so far removed from the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in that theater, her heart breaking as she watched her marriage fall apart. That woman had been lost, drowning in pain and uncertainty. But she'd fought her way back, piece by piece, and now she was standing on solid ground. "I think I am happier," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "It's not that everything's perfect. It's just, I'm okay with where I am. And that feels good." Andrew reached over, lacing his fingers with mine. "You should be proud of yourself, Claire. You've come a long way." The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity. I'd spent so much time looking forward, focusing on building a new life, that I hadn't allowed myself to reflect on just how far I'd come. I decided to revisit my journal, flipping through the pages to see the evolution of my journey. The early entries were filled with raw emotion, anger, sadness, confusion. But as I read on, I saw a shift. There were moments of hope, small victories, and finally a sense of peace. The final page of my journal was blank, and it struck me as symbolic. This was a new chapter, one I could fill with anything I wanted. I picked up a pen and began to write, not about the past or even the present, but about the future. I wrote about the places I wanted to travel, the skills I wanted to learn, the dreams I once tucked away for someday. And as the words spilled onto the page, I felt a surge of excitement. This was my life and it was mine to shape. In the weeks that followed, I started acting on those dreams. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always been curious about but never pursued. The first session was awkward. I fumbled with the camera settings and felt out of place among the more experienced students. But as the weeks went on, I found my rhythm. Capturing moments through the lens became a way to see the world differently, to appreciate the beauty in small, everyday details. One weekend, I took a solo trip to the coast, armed with my camera and a notebook. The drive was long, but the sight of the ocean stretching endlessly before me made it worth every mile. I spent hours walking along the shore, the salty breeze tangling my hair, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks soothing my soul. I took photos of everything, the sunlight glinting off the water, the weathered driftwood scattered along the sand, the seagulls soaring overhead. That trip felt like a turning point, a declaration of independence and possibility. When I returned home, Claire greeted me with a hug and a grin. "You look different," she said, echoing Andrew's earlier observation. "Like you found something you were looking for." "Maybe I have," I replied, and for the first time I truly believed it. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I received a promotion at work, the culmination of months of hard work and dedication. My pottery skills improved, and I even started gifting my creations to friends and family, each piece a tangible reminder of how far I'd come. And though Andrew and I didn't talk about the future in definitive terms, our connection deepened with each passing day. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, he turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "What's next for you, Claire? What do you want from life?" I thought about it for a moment, the possibilities swirling in my mind. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But for the first time, I'm excited to find out." And that was the truth. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Each day was a blank page, and I was the one holding the pen. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. And that was more than enough. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing one, I grew more comfortable with the unknown. It was strange at first, not having every detail of my future mapped out. For so long, my life had been defined by stability and routine: marriage, a shared home, a predictable rhythm. Now the openness of my life felt like a blank canvas, both liberating and a little intimidating. But rather than fear it, I leaned into the possibilities. My photography became more than just a hobby. What started as a quiet passion soon blossomed into something bigger. Encouraged by Claire and Emma, I entered a local photography contest, submitting a series of black and white shots from my trip to the coast. To my surprise, one of my photos, a simple image of waves crashing against jagged rocks, won second place. The recognition was small but significant, a spark that reignited my confidence in pursuing creative endeavors. One of the judges, a gallery owner named Lila, reached out after the contest to invite me to an upcoming exhibition featuring local artists. Her gallery was a charming space tucked into a bustling part of the city, its walls adorned with everything from abstract paintings to minimalist sculptures. "I'd love to showcase your work," she said during our conversation, her enthusiasm infectious. "You have a unique perspective. It feels honest." Her words stayed with me long after I left the gallery. Honest. It was a simple compliment, but it carried weight. My photos weren't elaborate or technically perfect, but they captured what I saw, what I felt. That honesty, I realized, had become a theme in my life. A refusal to hide behind pretense or settle for anything less than authenticity. The exhibition was scheduled for the following month, and the preparation consumed my free time. I spent evenings sifting through my collection, selecting pieces that told a story. Andrew helped where he could, offering feedback with his usual gentle honesty. "This one," he said, pointing to a photo of sunlight streaming through tree branches. "It's hopeful." Hopeful. Another word that resonated deeply. It hadn't always been easy to feel hope, not after what I'd been through. But now it felt like a steady undercurrent carrying me forward. The exhibition opening was a small, intimate affair, but the room buzzed with energy. Friends, co-workers, and strangers wandered through the gallery, pausing to study each piece. Hearing their reactions, sometimes quiet murmurs, sometimes enthusiastic praise, was surreal. Claire was there, of course, beaming with pride as she snapped pictures of me standing beside my work. Emma brought a few friends, their laughter and warmth filling the space. Even Andrew, who usually shied away from crowds, stayed by my side, his quiet presence grounding me. At one point during the evening, Lila pulled me aside. "You know," she said, her tone conspiratorial, "I don't usually say this, but I think you have something special. If you're interested, we could discuss a solo show sometime." "Ist hier, stunt." "A solo show?" She nodded, smiling. "Think about it. No rush. But I think you're ready." Ready. The word echoed in my mind as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. Was I ready? To put myself out there? To take another leap into the unknown? The thought was daunting, but it also filled me with excitement. I'd spent so long playing it safe, holding back out of fear or doubt. Maybe it was time to let go of that hesitation. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and creating. I threw myself into my photography, exploring new techniques and experimenting with themes. My solo show took shape piece by piece, each photo a reflection of my journey, moments of pain, growth, joy, and discovery. The process was exhausting but deeply fulfilling, and by the time the opening night arrived, I felt a strange mix of nerves and pride. The gallery was packed, more people than I'd expected filling the space. They wandered from photo to photo, their faces thoughtful, their conversations hushed. Lila was her usual effervescent self, introducing me to attendees and praising my work. Claire and Emma flitted about, their enthusiasm contagious, while Andrew stayed close, his quiet support steady as ever. Toward the end of the evening, a woman approached me, her expression warm but serious. "Your work," she said, gesturing toward a photo of a lone figure standing on a rocky beach. "It feels so personal. Like it's telling a story." "It is," I admitted, surprised by her insight. "It's my story." She smiled, her gaze lingering on the photo. "Thank you for sharing it. It's beautiful." Her words stayed with me long after the night ended. Sharing my story, through photos, through conversations, through the life I was rebuilding, had become a way of healing, not just for me but for others. It wasn't about seeking validation or approval. It was about connection, about reminding myself and those around me that growth was possible, even after the hardest of losses. As I locked up the gallery that night, Lila handed me a small envelope. "You've got a lot of admirers," she said with a wink. "This one left a note for you." I opened it later, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea. The note was simple but heartfelt, written in neat handwriting. "Your photos remind me that even in the darkest moments, there's light to be found. Thank you for that." Tears filled my eyes as I read the words. It was a reminder of how far I'd come, of the light I'd found, and the strength I'd discovered within myself. Life was still unpredictable, still messy at times, but it was also full of possibility, and I was ready to embrace every bit of it. The months after the solo show felt like the beginning of a new era in my life. Opportunities began to flow in. A few offers to showcase my work in other galleries, a collaboration with a local magazine, and even a small commission to photograph a wedding. My photography, once a quiet personal project, had become something tangible and meaningful, something I could call my own. But the true reward wasn't the recognition or the success. It was the peace I felt each day, knowing I had built this life from the ground up. I had faced the darkness, stumbled through uncertainty, and emerged stronger, more assured. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Andrew remained by my side, steady as always. Our relationship wasn't built on grand gestures or fiery passion, but on something more enduring. Trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding of each other's needs. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll in, he turned to me with a quiet smile. "You know," he said, "it's been incredible watching you grow into this version of yourself." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I didn't do it alone," I said finally, glancing at him. "You've been there every step of the way. I've just been lucky enough to witness it," he said softly. "The hard work was all you." I leaned against him, letting the rhythm of the rain and his warmth settle over me. He was right. I had done the work, taken the steps to reclaim my life, but it was the people around me. Claire, Emma, my new community, and Andrew, who had reminded me that I didn't have to do it alone. The anniversary of the day I'd left Jack came and went without fanfare. I spent it quietly, reflecting not on the pain but on the growth that had followed. I no longer carried anger toward him, no longer replayed the betrayal in my mind. He was a chapter in my story, one that had ended. The rest of the book was mine to write. A few weeks later, while walking through the park with Andrew, I noticed a group of children flying kites on a breezy afternoon. Their laughter filled the air, and I stopped to watch, mesmerized by the bright, colorful shapes soaring against the blue sky. One kite in particular caught my eye. A simple white one with a golden sun painted in the center. It danced and dipped with the wind, resilient and free. "That one," I said, pointing to the golden kite. "It reminds me of something." "What's that?" Andrew asked, tilting his head. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. That even when things feel broken, you can still find a way to rise. Andrew squeezed my hand, and we stood there for a moment, watching the kites flutter in the wind. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't afraid of it. Whatever came next, I was ready. And with that thought, I took a deep breath, smiled up at the sky, and walked forward into the life I had rebuilt. One step at a time, one day at a time, one dream at a time.